Welcome to the Zen Stoic Path. On this episode, I have a very special guest. I have Heather Daly, the founder of Conscious Kids Coaching. Heather is a kids confidence coach and a pediatric OT by trade, and she has come onto the Zen Stoic Path for us to have a conversation where she discusses the ways in which she helps kids to actually regulate their nervous systems, build confidence in themselves, and be safe in their bodies to experience their emotions. She works with parents and kids to help them to create a peaceful, cohesive, and fruitful relationship together. Heather also happens to be my girlfriend, my life partner, the most amazing woman that I've ever met, and I'm truly excited to share this episode with you. We did go into her Conscious Kids coaching process for a little bit, and then inevitably ended up talking about our relationship and just the ways in which we run our dynamic. Now, this is something that we do enjoy talking about because we truly do have a relationship that, in our eyes, is a dream come true, something that we didn't think was even possible before we met each other. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode. I'm really excited to share it with you. It was an awesome conversation, and there are a ton of nuggets throughout the episode. So enjoy. Another exciting announcement that we talk about in this episode is actually a podcast that Heather and I are going to be creating called The Unconscious Couple. Now, this is not a relationship-centric podcast. It actually is a podcast centered around the things that genuinely interest Heather and I. So we'll be talking about all the different things that really pique our interest, the things that inspire us. We'll be bringing on guests that we think are really cool and fun to talk to, and we'll be exploring things that we like to do in our everyday lives that help us to live a fruitful and fulfilling life. Things like our morning routines, things like our workout routines, meditation styles, coaching styles, different stories from our experience. And we're purely doing this as a creative passion project to start, and we are really excited to share it with the world. So if you've enjoyed the Zen Stoic Path and you want to get to know more of the unfiltered Victor, then I would go and listen to the Unconscious Couple podcast when it comes out. Enjoy the episode. So this is a very exciting episode that we get to do together. First of all, you are my girlfriend, the most wonderful thing in my life, the most beautiful gift that I could ask for. And you're also a badass coach that now is working and helping kids with their confidence. And you went from being an OT who was happy with the work you were doing, yet feeling drained by the whole process of it and what you were in, to being someone who has their own coaching practice and is doing what they love and is helping people in the way that you want to help people. And you're experiencing this freedom, which I'm just so blown away by the fact that you did that in less than a year. So, Heather, welcome to the Zen Stoic Path.
Thank you. This is a long time coming.
Yeah.
Very excited.
Oh, me too. So I know, like, you work with kids, and I know something that parents who watch this show have probably thought to themselves, like, how can I teach this to my kids? Or like, I wish I knew this as a kid, because you and I both had a childhood where we didn't know any of this stuff regarding philosophy, regarding psychology, and different ways that we can help ourselves and help others. So how did you get into working with kids? Because I know it chose you, but obviously the people listening have not had
that. Yeah, it always chose me. It was just a force of nature that no matter how hard I tried to deny it, just always was and will be my path. And, you know, after graduating OT school and going to school to become an OT, I had every intention of going into the more hardcore, quote unquote, side of OT with, let me work with a neurological population, you know, thinking of going into spinal cord injury, stuff like that. It never came to fruition in the best way. It always was pediatrics. Every single job, every single state I lived in, and all of my clinicals and schooling, it just time and time again was working with children. It always was something that I was good at and that I loved and that worked really well.
Yeah, it's certainly been amazing watching you work with kids, because you connect and relate with them so easily. Like I've even seen like just the way that you connect and relate with my younger brother and sister who they're 15, or like other, you know, kids of friends that we have. What is it that you love about working with kids as opposed to adults? Because I know you tried to work with adults and the universe kept redirecting you, but what do you love about it?
They're so honest, and that's inherently funny and entertaining. You never know what's going to happen or what they're going to say, and I really love that and resonate with that. I also find that it's very complementary to my energy because there's this cool, hey, let me let you know something, or I want to share something with you or invite you into something energy, like a big sister energy that I feel really come online when I work with kids. And I've been really enjoying, you mentioned your siblings, I've been really enjoying that preteen to teen age group for that reason, where it's just kind of like, hey, let me tell you something I wish I knew when I was your age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're letting them in on a little secret.
I am.
You definitely are. I mean, especially not only with the work that you do for the kids, but also you also work with their parents as part of the process. And what do you think most people get wrong about their perspective on helping their kids to become more confident or more able in the world to do what they want to do?
Well, it's a trick question because I never call a parent wrong, especially because I'm not a parent. Right. So that's always something I hold as a foundation, is that I have not yet walked in a mother's shoes, and I don't truly know what that's like from an embodiment perspective. So I actually think that is one of the biggest pillars, is to walk in with a certain level of respect and admiration just for the role that person is in from a parental perspective. Something that I guess I can speak on my childhood, or where in a perfect world where I would have been nurtured a little bit more as a child, is I always felt as though my parents wanted me to be a certain way that I just wasn't. You know, we talk about true nature in regards to just who I truly am at the core. And we always talk about it in the context of our relationship and of love, that it's just such a match. It's such a vibe, right? And
yeah, it's so easy just to be together, right?
Yeah.
And aligning with our true nature, which I would love to hear your take. I mean, I've heard it like a million times, but I would love to hear it in the context of the show.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the more that I am loving and embracing myself and my true nature, the more I can see and appreciate that of my clients as well. And then there's so much beauty in a parent also wanting their child to blossom into the person that they are, that they incarnated here to be, rather than a carbon copy of the lineage. And that was where I fell, especially with a lot of well-meaning religious conditioning in my upbringing. That was where there was a lot of disconnect, and where even to this day, it's created avoidable conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's the parents that we have and the elders in our lives, they have this idea of what they want us to be, and they attempt to fit us into that box. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that in my own life, and from hearing about yours, the same thing happens every time. Like, it gets met with resistance. It gets met with reactance and rebellion, and then people will assume that maybe their kid is not behaving, or they're not acting right.
Not listening, not behaving.
Right, when the reality is they're not being listened to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a projection.
Yeah.
They're not listening to me.
Right, or I'm not listening to them.
Or I'm not listening to me.
Yeah. That I think it's fascinating, especially one of the things that I talk about on this podcast quite a bit. I've talked about it in the training, the Liberation Leadership training that you were a part of last year.
Living testimony of, yes.
But this idea that as a coach, and this can extend into any kind of parental relationship or teacher relationship, but one of the role models that I have in all the work that I do is Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was an absolutely like brilliant person, brilliant in the field of psychology, and has brought so much innovation to our understanding of the unconscious mind. And one thing that was so beautiful about the way that he did things, and the reason why I bring this up is because I see you embody this, and I see this is why you connect with kids so well, is that Carl Jung, no matter how accomplished or prestigious he was, Alan Watts would say that he had this twinkle in his eye that you knew, that he knew, that no matter how prestigious and successful he was, he always knew that he was somewhat of a rascal, that he was just a little kid inside. And
I am a rascal.
You are a rascal, as am I, which is why we work well together.
Yes. Yeah.
But that knowingness of his acceptance of the child within, the irreducible childlike nature that exists within every single person, is what allows kids to even trust you, because they know that you still have that in you. They can feel it. They can sense it.
Yeah.
So what has your experience been with that notion?
Just being a goof.
It is true.
Yeah. Every single person from infancy and onward learns best through play. It lowers all the defenses. It puts us in this malleable, plastic, dynamic state of movement and receptivity, and everything just falls into place. And then we also move from a space of intuition rather than the thinking conscious mind, or rather than looking outward at who can I please? Who can I get this A from, this award from? If we're just playing, it's something that comes from within.
Yeah, I remember you've always told me that the way that is best to connect with a child they've never met, like if you're meeting a friend's kids for the first time, or you're meeting family for the first time, to not try to have a conversation with them, but to engage in an activity. Like if they're really into like video games or a toy or a play set that they have, like go do the thing with them. Why is that so important? And why is it so much more effective?
Kids just aren't really interested in talking to you. They want to live life with you, and they just want to feel like part of the party, or that you want to come to their party. And that's just human nature. It's the nature of belonging. And most kids that I've ever met don't just do things for the sake of optics. Like adults, they're not as hi, how are you? You know, they're like, okay, anyway, can I?
They don't have a budget for small talk.
Yeah,
Let's put it that way.
nor should they. And yeah, so it's like, no, I'm going to go play Zelda. I want to go outside. And same thing. Then you are a part of their life from an experiential perspective, instead of someone that their parent just kind of has to like hold them there and be like.
Yeah, it's so much more aligned with the way that they interact with each other. Right? Like they don't start by like, "Hi, how are you? What do you do in school?" And like they don't do that. They'll just start playing. Like I know one of my friends, you're friends with him too now, that I had on this podcast, Danny, who was also a student in the training. Every time he tells the story of how we met, like 'cause we met in kindergarten, he's like, you know, you were just playing with some blocks, and my dad told me, you know, go play with blocks with him, and then like we've been best friends ever since. Like,
yeah,
always been super close, and that's the way that kids naturally connect. It's also interesting that, you know, adults can connect that way too. It doesn't always have to be like, oh, we need to like talk about things. It can be like we can have just a shared activity where we can build rapport, build connection.
Yeah, and also we connect through laughter. That's definitely been you and I.
Yeah.
This whole time is just, by being goofs, and actually the laughter and living in that body, like that neurology, actually thinking about what's going on internally with that oxytocin release and the happiness and the butterflies and the safety versus, you know, we have to always come together and have some stringent
conscious conversations
that are, just exhausting.
That is actually a really good point. Especially because our constant state at home, which is my favorite thing ever, it's like this mix of being playful, being loving, romantic, and just shit talking 24/7.
So much shit.
It's true.
About
It's just nonstop.
all of you.
Yes. All in good fun, of course.
Just kidding.
Yes. But I think what's interesting about it is just you and I are just so much ourselves at home. And it's one of the reasons why it allows our relationship to be so easy for the both of us.
Yeah.
Right?
Very ease-filled, for sure.
I remember you and I, we did an episode on your old show, and we talked about the honeymoon period, right? Because and I think this is a really important topic that I wanted to bring it into this show, of discussing how people have this illusion, this concept in their mind of the honeymoon period, which is basically just a phase of when they're getting to know somebody where they're on their best behavior and they're not really letting the real them out.
Right. And then there's the infatuation factor on top of it too. Yeah.
So, I mean, like, what are your thoughts on like that whole idea? Because we've been together for almost 2 years, and we had people in the beginning and even like after a year tell us like you're in the honeymoon period, like all these things. Yeah. And so, what are your your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say people still probably think that about us, that, oh, they just haven't been together long enough to start.
When is long enough?
Yeah. I don't know. Nor do I care. Actually, I just, whenever someone makes a comment like that, it says more about what they prefer or what they're accepting more than it does about us, obviously. But Burma honeymoon, why would you not get more into each other? More and more and more and more. Why is that something that's not talked about? Why do we never see that? Or
it is interesting because it's not the norm of what I've observed through life, especially before you and I got together. The models for relationships, even ones that seemed good, had all of these notions and concepts to them, like, oh, it's all about compromise and all of these.
No, it's not. That's so stupid to me.
Why do you feel like that's stupid?
Why that compromise is so stupid? Like lose. Do we just want to both lose for the rest of our lives, or both be half happy? To me, it just speaks to like a larger theme. And obviously sometimes, especially once we have children and stuff, we're going to have to learn how to be more flexible. Than we have such a charmed easy existence now, and I'm enjoying that, the lower complexity that we have in our physical circumstances right now. Yeah, to me, the constant preaching of compromise, or constantly making this nucleus of a relationship all about, we're just really good at navigating conflict, and he just triggers the shit out of me, and he just reminds me so much of this authority figure in my life, or my dad or whoever. And it's just, I couldn't be with someone who triggered me any less. It's like, are you getting paid by the hour to be with that
to be triggered by this person?
Then why are you still
here?
Yeah,
that's something that I have no idea why that has become like this popularized thing, which is like, the relationship is like it's like a sparring partner. It's like, no, it's fucking not in my world.
No.
And what I think it's interesting, and I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this up on this podcast, but now I'm going to. But let's talk about Jada Pinkett Smith for a moment, because we're talking about Jada. That's it. But the reason why I bring up Jada is because she is this public figure who reaches millions of people.
Super famous,
with a narrative around this idea of like your relationship being like this perfect mirror that's going to show you all your shit. And it will. But how you navigate that and how you interact with seeing your own stuff is really what makes the difference. And it doesn't have to be this sparring match of like, we navigate conflict really well, or we really work through things well. Like,
oh, so you despise each other.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like, this woman hates her husband.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to give a little bit of a moving towards, I believe that one of the biggest factors is liking one another, as far as really being in something that is going to grow and more beautiful and stronger every year. It's just liking each other, vibing with each other, genuinely liking each other's jokes and the way that they smell and their little mannerisms, and even the flaws and the silly things that they do, which you could list so many domestic, quote unquote, like mistakes or annoying things that I do personally. But because you're into me, it's just like, ha, oops. It's just funny, but it's true. Stuff happens here that could genuinely cause such a fight. And I've heard anecdotally in other households, it does cause such a fight. It does cause tension and make meaning out of it. This means you don't listen to me or respect me or really truly want me, whatever.
Yeah, all those complex equivalences, like people make meaning out of these behaviors.
Yeah, this equals that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating, especially if it's, I mean, like I'm sure you've heard it all as well, but I've heard things from like, yeah, just the way that they breathe, like, just bothers me. It's like, oh, so you don't like the way they exist. Yes. Or like, oh, because they didn't clean up this mess, now they don't love me. And I actually, this just brought to light something that I didn't have words for. I never described it or put attention on it, at least in our dynamic, but I've never experienced a conversation with you where either of us were saying like, you should do X. Like, that word should doesn't exist in our conversation when relating to each other. Like, you should blah, blah, blah. And the reason why I think that that's so important is because we don't suffer from the way things are in reality. Rather, we suffer with the way that we think about them. It's our thoughts that make it so. It's all suffering is an indication that we're attached to a thought. And the thought might be that whatever is shouldn't be this way, and it should be the way it's not. It should be something else.
Arguing with reality. Also wanting to change someone else's true nature. Wanting to fit two puzzle pieces together that just don't work by being like, well, what if we just shave off this part of you or add this on, and you're too much of this and you're not enough that.
Yeah, it's if only their personality were completely different, then I would totally love them.
Yeah. And I think in the spiritual community, it gets spun like, well, once they do their shadow work, or once they get closer to their higher self, or once they surpass this hurdle within, then they'll be worthy of my liking.
Right.
My approval, my loving.
Which falls into the I'll be happy when fallacy.
Right.
Right. But just the relationship version of it. Where it's like the happiness and the love that you experience exists outside of what is.
Right. Right. So then you can never be present.
That's true. Yeah. Never present, never at peace, which you'll always find something wrong. And it's not the relationship, because people in those situations, they'll break up, but then they'll go and date the same person over and over and over again, because the reality is they're just wanting things to be different than they are, wanting people to be different than they are.
Yeah.
And I thought one of the things that was fascinating with you and I, and it was an effortless experience. So it's not something that like I intentionally tried to do, or that I don't think you intentionally tried to do, but you and I, when we started living together and spending more time together, like we both became aware of our objectively annoying quirks in each other. And the reaction to them was like thinking that they were cute, like almost thinking that they're so endearing, like, oh, this makes you.
Or talking
and I
shit.
love this. Yeah, we're just talking shit.
And then it just added to something that we enjoy doing.
That's right.
We just made a hobby out of it.
We did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely want to clarify that we get along really well because we're so compatible, not because we're so great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not because we're relationship experts.
Not at all. No,
it actually falls more into the true nature thing, which I would love for you to go more into that in the relationship context, or at least how you view it, like with you and I.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we've literally been describing it this whole part of the conversation, that who is someone fundamentally to their core, in their essence, that is their uniqueness that they bring to the table, and not just to the relationship, but to this whole collective, to this life experience, in their authenticity. And some things you just can't, and I would say shouldn't, change about a person. And so, yeah, often if I'm hearing anecdotally about things that just aren't really going well or aren't really aligning, I'm hearing a lot of true nature mismatch. And when you make someone wrong in their authenticity, even if they're making mistakes, when you make someone wrong for being their authentic selves, and then it's spun into some kind of a spiritual narrative or spiritual standard, in my perspective, it's very harmful. And sometimes it can actually be abusive emotionally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it just creates an attachment to the story, especially when you start to weave in the spiritual narrative of like, oh, well, we're going through these bouts of arguments day in and day out because it's our karmic debt that we need to repay.
You want to talk about good math?
Yes, let's talk about good math.
Can you say the good math thing?
Yes.
You say it so well.
I like the way you say it, though. So Heather and I have this thing where we talk about, we say, is the math mathing? And essentially what this means is like, we have had our difficult moments, but at least the way that I see that we've handled our difficult moments is like they're this beautiful blessing in contrast to like what we've heard some of our friends in going through their difficult moments. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that allows you to go through difficult moments is the mathing, which means like, are the results of the relationship what you want to experience? And the framing of what you want to experience, everybody can want to experience something different, right? Maybe not everybody wants the relationship that you and I have, where the experience of it is like a safe and like peaceful haven, while also being like this romantic, fun, funny adventure, all simultaneously. And maybe not everybody wants that, right? Maybe
it's a big commitment,
right?
Time, energy, investment.
100%.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And it is one of those types of relationship that does require both people to put each other as the number one priority in their lives, right? So not everybody wants to do that necessarily.
Yeah, I would say God first and then each other.
Yeah.
So a little bit. Like, you're a higher power of your own understanding, or your relationship to self, and then the other. Yeah.
I would say that is true. So there is paradox in that. It's like that you and I put each other number one, but here's the thing. And this is where like the no compromise thing comes in. Everything that I do for you that like is going over the top. We always joke that you're super high maintenance and I love maintaining you.
Yes. It's not a joke.
It's not a joke. It's real, but we laugh when we say it. But we always like the paradox in that of me making you my number one priority. And we talked about this from the moment we got together, is that we will still hold our own personal individual North Star.
Yes. Like
above everything. So what that means in paradox here is that yes, we are each other's number one priority, but everything, at least on my end, and I think the same is true for you, everything that we do for each other is because we sincerely want to do it. Yeah. Like any favors or anything that like any presents that we give each other, you love your presents.
Big love language of mine, presents.
That's right. Or any time that we spend together is always because we genuinely want to do it. Yeah. And even though we put each other's number one, part of how we keep each other's number one is by also tuning into ourselves and what is in our own individual highest goods.
Yeah,
So there's
absolutely.
a paradox there, and sometimes people can get caught in the narrative of one or the other, like, well, I got to put myself first, so like never mind what they want, or oh, they want it, I don't want to fucking do it, so but I'm going to do it anyway because they're number one, right? So it's about being able to live in that paradox.
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying in the putting God first is harmonious with the putting of one's highest good first, like one's purpose in life and all that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, think about last night, and this is a component of safety in a relationship. We had I guess we call it a miscommunication, where I guess it was more so like we just mismanaged timing. Yeah. We had a miscommunication with time. And we were supposed to go on a sunset walk in the park, which is one of our rituals. And there wasn't enough time for you to do that and go to jujitsu. And you were like, I know I said that we were going to do this. So this was a terrible question. So I just like rejected it, but
it was good. But that's part of like honoring of the dynamic that we've created.
For sure. You were like, I know you said that, or I know we said that we were going to go do this. I don't have time to do this and leave for jujitsu. Would you like for me to not go? And I was like, I'm never going to tell you to not go do something that's good for you. I'm just never going to do that. It's one thing if it's an intrinsic, organic decision that you make because you know that's what's in the highest good, or if it was a bigger promise, possibly. But yesterday I was like, I don't answer that question for you ever. I don't say, don't go to the gym or don't go to jujitsu. That's something only you can ever decide on.
Yeah, that's very true. And that is what allows the dynamic to thrive, is because we both will honor that in each other, because it is tempting when your partner wants you to do something and you want to make them happy, even if you don't want to do it, to do it anyway. But to not only have the discernment within self and the safety to do that without getting punished for it, but also the accountability in the other to honor that, which I think is really amazing. And I feel very grateful that we get to have that dynamic. So I do want to close the loop on the mathing though, because that's part of the dynamic that allows us to create what I like to call emotional currency, right? It's the ability for us to feel seen, heard, understood, admired, and respected in our relationship, and we build that up. So the emotional currency that you have with any one person is like you build it up over time that you've known them, and over the connection that you have, and over the shared values that you experience together, and you start to build up a bank of that. And essentially what it might look like in practice is the amount of good days that you have with each other. So if a person is getting together with somebody and they're like fighting within like the first week or the first month, it's like you may not have enough in the bank, enough emotional currency in the bank to like be like, is this really a good idea? So like when we look at our difficult situations, which again, they're really a breeze to handle.
They're pretty chill.
They're pretty chill, but they're a breeze to handle because of the emotional currency that we built. So like, for example, like we can look at, have you had more good days than bad days? Like, is the mathing?
That's ultimately it right there.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Like,
so what's the math? What's the percentage of good, and what's the percentage of not good?
Yes.
And then also, you talk about this in your sovereign dream meditation, or, way of conceptualizing your future or aligning your future. If you pick a random average Tuesday of the relationship, a random average Tuesday in the household, not us in Bora Bora doing everyone get along in Bora Bora,
Everybody can get along on vacation.
What's a random average Tuesday sample of the relationship? That's something that Jordan Peterson talks about, where how you do the dinner table or how you do the hello after coming home, you do that literally every single day. That's the stuff that actually matters. And those are the interactions that you actually want to nail.
Yeah, 100%. Because if you have more bad days than good days, and you are wrapped up in a story of like, oh, but it should be this way, and like, then you have some spiritual justification.
It's my karmic starseed.
Yeah, some spiritual justification, which makes it actually even more difficult to see clearly in those, because now you're starting to involve, you know, your faith in a higher power and your karmic debts and all of that as a way of justifying it. And when you start to get existential with your stories, they become much stronger and they don't allow you to see the reality of things. And so is the mathing is a great question, and it's something that we build up. And one thing that I think is really beautiful about that is that it allows us to always use our reality of, like you said, our perfect average Tuesday as the metric for how it's going. And you and I greet each other with the same level of enthusiasm that we did from day one. Actually, more more than we did on day one.
That's how it goes. Yeah.
We laugh the same way. The compliments that we exchange with each other. It's like you and I think this is really cool, is that I've never had this with any other human, but that I can give the same compliment like 30 times in a day, and it's received as though it's the first time I'm saying it, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And
I'm such an attention whore. Like it just it never fades.
Never fades, as am I.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Yeah, I'm aware.
We know.
Yes, of course. So I think that's a really beautiful thing, and that's one of the things that allows it to feel fresh, like constantly. Like we have a really good friend, Stuart Savatsky, who has been on this podcast.
I was hoping you were going to mention that next, actually. Yeah.
And so Stuart, you know, he's helped countless couples like come back from like the depths,
hundreds
of like,
and like he's the OG.
He really
Cupid.
He is the OG. You know, he's done therapies for families, couples. You know, he married yoga and like is like a master of Kundalini and Tantra, and just a wonderful, wonderful human being.
He's
like
such a sweetheart.
Yeah, he's a 74-year-old guy, just amazing, just amazing person to have around.
He just is love.
Yes. And what was really awesome about, you know, hosting Stuart in our home and like hanging out with him for a few weeks is that, you know, he showed us, you know, some of the fundamentals of Tantra, and like the West sees Tantra as like, you know, as Stuart said,
50 orgasms.
Yeah, like souped up nookie or something like
it's souped up nookie.
Yeah,
That's
like
so
in America, it's looked at as like this, like, you know, how to make your sex life freaky deaky amazing.
Yeah.
You know,
How
which
to
that's
have
not
10-hour orgasms
right,
and,
which is not what it is.
Yeah.
And it in fact just starts with like the way that you connect with each other, the way that you regard each other. So
close on.
Right.
Yes.
Close on, like completely. And so this is just in conversation, which like, how are you verbally connecting with your partner? And I remember we helped him host a workshop that he taught. And in that workshop, what was really amazing is he taught this like reverberation exercise.
Yeah, like a love reverberation or positive reverberations.
Where you would just tell your partner what you love about them for like an extended period of time. And then he'd say to switch. But when you switch, they're not doing the same thing yet. They're actually just telling you how it felt to hear all of that. And then when you switch again, you're telling them how it felt to hear how they felt from your original affirmations and compliments and everything like that. And it creates this like beautiful reverberation and this energy that just like raises up your emotions in this really, really profound way.
Yeah, I was bawling my eyes out.
I remember, and I remember when you and I were doing it, one of the things that kind of took us aback the most was the fact that like that is every day.
Yeah.
Like, that's how we talk to each other. Like we do that reverberation very naturally, which what's fascinating about when you have that experience is that you also realize that the times when people fall into rough patches in their relationship, to put it lightly, is they're doing it in reverse. They're doing a negative reverberation. Well, when you said this, I felt like this, and then it just goes back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, sometimes for years.
Yeah.
Like a whole marriage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a horrible existence, that's going to create a lot of suffering to be in a relationship like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's where the ball and chain narrative comes from, where
right.
I hate my wife, I hate being married.
Yeah, there's far too many jokes about that, and it's super weird.
Such a weird thing that is widely accepted, and I find it so confusing. And
yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And I just think what's cool about that whole reverberation thing is like that's what makes it feel like a perma honeymoon.
Yeah.
It's because that's what you're doing in the beginning anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is, I think, is to be very sincere in what you agree to and what your boundaries are and what you want to say versus what you don't want to say in conversation. And that sincerity and that genuine communication, I think, has also been a big part of the experience that we get to have together.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think as a golden rule, there's just never an attack on character, right?
Never.
Like that's just a hard boundary. That's a hard no, never. There's just no, you're such a blah, blah, blah. And
no labels.
There's no labels. There's no insults. There's feedback. And full disclosure, I'm a pain in the ass. Like I'm working on my positive attitude, but
I love whatever attitude you got.
Yeah, that's part of the problem though, is that you genuinely don't mind if I'm just in my whiny self or
right, because I don't think you should be anything other than what you are.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I make my feelings and preferences known.
Yes, you do.
Verbally. So it's not that anyone's sitting around, biting their tongue or waiting for the other shoe to fall or anything, because that's when it's a fragile honeymoon, and it's just a temporary cloud that.
Well, that's what the stereotypical honeymoon is. It is that exactly. It's like you're biting your tongue in the beginning because you're like, I don't really think I'm safe to say this.
Yeah. Let's never fight.
Yeah, or let's never fight. Yeah, and you're trying to outrun your first fight kind of thing, and. I think what's beautiful is that from the beginning, right, you started this and I learned it more from you, I would say, is you would always say what was on your mind from the very start. And you said it in a way that even if it was related to me, you weren't making what you felt my problem, but you were just sharing your feeling.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't take your feeling personally. I would embrace your feeling. And so like we would create this like back and forth where it was very safe to say exactly what you needed to say. Yeah. Nobody was going to take it personally.
Right.
And as a result, transparency, honesty, and just, again, genuine communication is the natural result of that.
Right. Well, I'm responsible for my own emotional experience. And that's something in the spiritual narrative and the whole masculine is this and feminine is that and all that stuff. There's a lot about the masculine holding space for the feminine, for her full spectrum of expression and emotion. However, that can turn into toxicity if you're just unconditionally holding space and trying to take on and transmute and process somebody else's stuff, somebody else's trauma, or whatever is their reactivity, or whatever's coming up for them. So I think that's a part of that line of thinking that does need to be clarified in order to not trauma dump onto the masculine or the man in the typical narrative or in a traditional
well, because I mean, if the man in such a dynamic could get stuck on the story of men are supposed to hold space, or the masculine's supposed to hold space, so therefore I cannot express or emote, like those stories, they limit what the actual honest expression is of the two parties. And so it's understanding that these are just concepts, these are stories. And while they may be helpful and insightful at times, what we really measure things on are like, what are the results? What's the reality of our experience of our average day?
Is the mathing.
Is the mathing, essentially.
Do we talk about romanticism with synchronicity and people that will,
No, not
oh
yet,
God.
but that's a good one.
People that will have dreams about each other or something, just something that's so far from what actually transpired, what's actually tangibly, physically here happening, but they'll have some quantum or 5D whatever and be like, we both had a dream about this, blah blah blah, so it means that we're gonna be together forever.
We
or
fight
whatever.
every day and we hate each other deeply, but we had this dream that was very similar.
That's another trap.
Yeah,
in my
is
opinion.
romanticizing the synchronicities, which I think synchronicities are beautiful, and
Of course, yes.
it's not something to build your foundation on or build or use as a reason for staying together if you're not happy and you don't actually like each other.
Yes.
And that can sometimes be a trap too. It's like, oh well, we were born in the same month, and so that means no, it doesn't mean anything. It's like the only thing that means anything is what are you experiencing right now, and do you want that? I think this is really interesting because we've had some well-meaning friends in the past. I remember ask a question of do you prioritize her comfort or her growth? And it was such a weird question. I didn't know how to answer at the time. I remember I was like,
it's an inappropriate question too.
Yes. And it's like, well, I don't prioritize anything for her. I prioritize her and her safety, from my, what the role that I choose to take on in the relationship. But I don't prioritize your growth. I'm not like, hey, you should be holding yourself to a higher standard and having difficult conversations. No, because again, from the beginning, I don't view our relationship as, a worthy sparring partner.
No.
It's a safe haven and just romantic, fun, hilarious adventure that we get to have. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're choosing to create.
Yeah. Life's hard enough. I don't want to come home to chaos or a war zone. Mm-hmm. This gets to be a place of rest, mm-hmm. and a place of peace and safety and passion, and that needs to be more normalized. Mm-hmm. And in regards to the safety or comfort or comfort or growth, there's a few things. Number one, you can't grow for me. You can't grow for anybody else. There's no such thing as secondhand growth. Mm-hmm. You can be a living invitation by embodying that yourself, by continually evolving and growing yourself, and that's it. Mm-hmm. You can't do a push-up for somebody. You can't take a breath for somebody. Trust me, every parent I've ever worked with would do it for their kid if they could. Mm-hmm. You can't change anybody. You can only support them and invite them. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, one of my biggest pieces of advice for any other couple that wants to be happy is don't take advice from other couples. Mm-hmm. Just don't. Just don't.
It's true. Including us.
Yeah, don't. Take what resonates, obviously, but in general, especially if someone is somehow... It's an illusion, but if someone is somehow seemingly postured above you, they're older than you, they've been together longer than you, they're, have more accolades, more money than you, whatever, it can be tempting to buy into what somebody's saying, but all you're doing is stepping into their projection field. Mm-hmm.
Into their story.
Yeah. For all we know, that person that asked that question, maybe I remind them of their mother or their sister on a deeply unconscious level. And in some way they're not even talking to me at all. And if I were less confident or more impressionable, that conversation could have gone very differently instead of thank
very true.
you for... that.
Thank you for your weird question.
I'm going to love you where you're at, and we're going to make fun of you after.
Of course.
On a podcast.
Yes. Excellent. Oh my goodness. So I think one other thing that I wanted to also share, and this is something that I didn't know I needed it until you and I were together and I was experiencing it every day. But you do this thing where you show me as much gratitude for the tiniest little thing that I do for you as like the most amazing grand romantic gesture. Like every single time, and it's been like that since the beginning. Like a little coffee, just amazing enthusiastic gratitude, which just like allows me to feel cherished in the relationship. And the same, like every single time, like it's never taken for granted, and there's always gratitude being exchanged. And I also notice the power of having that kind of dynamic, of having this gratitude for everything, no matter how big or small. And again, I think that goes hand in hand with that reverberation, that loving reverberation that we get to experience together.
That's it, for sure. It's not something I ever tried to do. A lot of it, this is where I will invite in a very woo moment, because I actually attribute a lot of it to the fact that time is an illusion. And from a quantum perspective, it literally feels like I'm connecting to the former self, myself in the past, that wanted this so bad. And whether I was in a relationship that wasn't aligned, or on the first date of that week, or whatever it was, there was just always this knowing that I carried, that this was what I was on my way to. This was always the path. And so it literally feels like that gratitude comes from that place of it. It is about what's acutely happening in that moment of that coffee, of whatever, but also it's me connecting to my faith and my knowing, and all the bumps along the path of getting to this. It just feels like I'm kind of sending that me love in that moment, that she's somehow being supported and receiving that love too.
Yeah, that's an amazing perspective. I have actually never heard you say that before.
Oh, you didn't know that?
No, but that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it does. It feels like that. It feels like it's okay. You know how this ends. It all works out in the end. I've always had really strong faith in myself and in things working out, just always. And I've always been absurdly supported by divine orchestration, truly.
Yeah, it's having that fundamental well-being, that trust in all of it working, which reminds me of something. And what's interesting is like the sequence of this conversation, because this is usually something that I would have in the beginning of talking about the relationship, of like, well, how do you create a relationship that has this type of energy or this type of experience to it? And one thing that I think is fascinating is you and I have both learned the whole like, oh, if you want to manifest a perfect partner, then you got to write down your list of everything you want, and to get your checklist going. Like, what do you want? What do you need? What do you refuse to tolerate? What are your boundaries?
Yeah.
And like, I've given that advice like back in the day when I like also bought into it. And then I also realized that your conscious mind can't even conceive of the entirety of how wonderful that person, the real person would be.
Yeah.
And that little checklist in your mind is just like a sliver, and it's not even important. And it also falls under the assumption that like, you know what's good for you and what would actually create happiness for you.
Yeah.
And so I remember, at least for myself, is I didn't set out with like a checklist before you and I met, but rather I set out with an intention of like the type of love I wanted to experience.
Yeah.
And I also expressed trust and readiness to have that in my life.
Yeah. What I liked reverse engineering how you went about it, actually. And I've actually taught some of my clients that approach instead of the typical weird Venn diagram thing that happens. And he has to be over 6 foot. And it's like, you're missing the point so much with that. But even that as an example, He has to be 6 foot. Why? For what purpose? What's the essence of that? How does that make you feel? What does that do for you? I feel so protected in his presence. He's so manly, or so, just rugged, whatever it is. Okay, well, can you have that essence without that physicality?
Mm-hmm. Without attachment to that form.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
You absolutely can.
Mm-hmm.
And taking that with breaking down your approach, how you went about it, because you set this intention in January of
2022.
Yeah. And we met
3
in
weeks later.
January. Yeah. So do you mind if I share part of that intention?
Oh, yeah, no, please.
Yeah. So I remember you stated, I'm ready and I trust.
Mm-hmm.
So that's both a decision and a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what is co-creation, right? You're deciding internally with what you do have in free will, and then you're aligning that with divine orchestration with the greater plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can take your hands off the wheel. It was, I'm ready and I trust that I will meet, or something along those lines.
Create this that will co-create this experience of love with this person, that it looks and feels this way.
Yeah, it feels this way, and together we will.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was all language like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't she needs to X, Y, Z.
Right.
It was, we will we'll co-create this together, and we'll have this experience with one another, which is exactly what I'm experiencing and more. Like our relationship is what initially inspired the phrase that I'll use sometimes, where I'll say, I get to experience things I didn't even know how to ask for, or things I didn't even realize I needed. Yeah. And like, our relationship is what started that whole thing. And it was a product of that. It was trusting in, it was deciding that I was ready, and then trusting in all that I can't control, the divine orchestration of it all, and really aligning with that. So like you said, it was a decision and a prayer simultaneously, which I think is a really beautiful way to put it. And trusting in that and just allowing it to come was, I would say, one of the best decisions and intentions I ever gave myself the opportunity to have.
Yeah. And it can be generalized to any context of life. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really beautiful framework that just really authentically emerged from you. And obviously it worked.
That's right. So before we begin to wrap up, I wanted to make sure that we plugged the thing that you and I are going to be working on, our little project.
Plug it up.
So one thing that Heather and I have decided to do is we actually decided to start a podcast together. This is obviously on the Zen Stoic path, but we are going to have a podcast of our own. And do you want to share the name?
You can do the honors, yeah.
Thank you. That's so sweet of you.
You came up with it,
Yes.
allegedly.
Allegedly. So we are going to be starting a new podcast. This podcast isn't going anywhere, so rest assured. But we'll be starting a new podcast called The Unconscious Couple, and it is something that we're really excited to be creating. Although we have the name couple in the title, it is not a relationship-centric podcast. We will every now and then talk about relationships, but we're going to essentially use it as a podcast to talk about the things that we're genuinely interested in. These same philosophical concepts that we talk about here, if it's something that's interesting and present in our lives, we are going to want to share it and have conversations with each other and with guests that we find interesting. And it is a whole notion of really allowing ourselves to be just totally genuine and real in what actually interests us and having our conversations. Right, we came up with a name because we noticed that there's a lot of people out there who
Jada Pinkett,
yes, who maybe are self-appointed conscious couples
or relationship experts,
right, or relationship experts that a lot of their advice just falls flat in a lot of situations. Sometimes it works and sometimes it's very helpful for people, but in some situations it falls flat, or it can create additional toxicity that doesn't need to be there because somebody starts to get attached to a narrative. The point is like, it's not a podcast about how great we are as a couple and why like we're smarter than everybody, but it's rather just one that is a co-creation that we get to discuss and share things that we find interesting, things that have been really helpful to us in our lives, and you know, ways in which we're being inspired and helped through the learning of all the things that we have sincere interest in.
Yeah, absolutely. More centered in personal growth and spirituality and just things that light us up, meeting in creativity and serving is a big intention. I can speak for both of us. I believe that serving the listeners, anyone that is going to be there, so loving any questions, any requests, like really wanting this to be something that is a co-creation between us, then also a collaboration between us and anyone that resonates with our style.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you've enjoyed this podcast, the Zen Stoic Path, I do my best to be as genuine and sincere as I possibly can be, as much of my real self as I can possibly bring onto this podcast. And I understand that sometimes I'll probably still filter myself through who I think I need to be as the Zen Stoic on this show. So the unconscious couple, you'll get much more of an unfiltered Victor. If you're enjoying this and you want to know more and, you know, get more into, you know, the way that I think, the way that Heather thinks, the way that we think together, and how we have conversations and co-create things, that will be the place to be.
Super nice.
Heather, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My
so
last
much.
question for you, and you know this question's coming, is what does it mean to you to live a liberated life?
Oh, I don't know if I was going to get hit with the the liberated life question.
You certainly are.
Lately for me, it's really just been coming back again and again and again to the here and now, catching my breath by being in the breath and just realizing that it's all so beautiful, it's all enough, and I no longer need to reach or try.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to creating more of this magic with you on our own show.
Unconscious couple.
The Unconscious Couple.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is how the channel grows, and I couldn't do it without you. So I'm very grateful for your engagement and for your willingness to share this show with the people that you care about. If you want to take the next step, be sure to go to zenstoic.com to get the Sovereign Awareness Technique. This technique is a free technique that will show you how to develop a deep sense of self-trust and intuition so that you can make effective decisions that are authentic for you. So be sure to go to zenstoic.com to get the Sovereign Awareness Technique, or go ahead and click the link in the show notes below.